This is the Louis T. Network.
In the lab room.
Welcome, you are in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. Today is football day because it's Thursday. Thursday night football action pitting the San Francisco 49ers versus the St. Louis Rams in an NFC West showdown. And look, this one matters. This one has some far-reaching consequences for both football teams involved. More so for the 49ers than the Rams. Look, the expectations for the Rams coming into this season, they were probably a little elevated after they finished the season off very strongly, and they had some success within the division. They gave the Seahawks a run for their money in Seattle. They beat them at home. They beat the 49ers at home, gave them a run for their money in San Francisco, tied them in that football game. They beat the Cardinals last year as well, and so the Rams were very, very tough within the division. A lot of high hopes, but their hopes and their expectations paled in comparison to this San Francisco 49ers football team. Look, when you come within a play or two away from going to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and then last year a play or two from actually winning the Super Bowl, the expectation in the next year, which is this year in 2013, is Super Bowl or bust. That means win it or it's another failure. And so the 49ers came into this season feeling like, hey, it's our time. We have put in our dues. We've paid our dues. It's time for us to be the team hoisting the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the season. Well, a 1-2 start doesn't seem to bode well for this football team in their quest to getting back to the Super Bowl. Look, this season is very young, and this 49ers team, the reason why we're making so much of this two-game losing streak is because since Jim Harbaugh has come on board as 49ers coach, there has been no such thing as a two-game losing streak. This team has never lost 2 games in a row under Jim Harbaugh. That was until last Sunday when the Indianapolis Colts came into Candlestick and stomped a mud hole in this football team, and they look lost on both sides of the football. Not just on offense. Everybody wants to make a lot out of this offense being lost and Colin Kaepernick looking out of sorts and this running game being very questionable. Frank Gore getting on his head coach about not getting the football. And he has a case. I mean, that first possession, when they actually scored their only touchdown, hell, their only points of the game, they ran the football down the throats of the Indianapolis Colts, and then they just went away from it. It vanquished into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again in this football game. And that made absolutely no sense to me. And so Frank Gore had a point. He wanted to get the running game off the ground. They got off to a nice, hot start running the football. And then the 49ers, I think themselves, cooled this running game off by simply not running the football. And so this offense looked lost. But I want to focus on the defense because this defense is supposed to be dominant. They're supposed to not give up points. They're supposed to stymie and stifle teams. Well, the Colts ran the football down the throat, down the belly of the beast. And Andrew Luck wasn't forced into any mistakes. They didn't force any turnovers. They didn't do the things that the 49ers are accustomed to doing on the defensive side of the football. And so they struggled not only offensively, but more surprisingly on defense as well. And so this team is out of sorts right now. They struggled 2 weeks ago against Seattle in Seattle. And look, you could argue that's just what happens in Seattle. What happens in Seattle stays in Seattle. Okay, that's the approach that I took. So I expected them to come home against Indy and right the ship. What I got was another one of those laughers that they had in Seattle. And I wasn't expecting that, nor was I prepared to see that occur. And so now I've got questions. The thing is, do the 49ers have answers in this game? Because the St. Louis Rams aren't going to lie down for them and allow them to get well in this football game. They're in for a tough test. They're in against a team that can get after the quarterback with Quinn and Long. They're in against a team that's very athletic, a lot of speed on this football team on both sides of the football. And so the Rams, they've started slow in their last 2 games. Both of them on the road versus very good football teams. So now they get a chance to come home, settle in against a team that they know very well. This is family business, so you throw the records out of the window, even though in this particular game, you can't throw the records out of the window because whichever team goes to 1-3 in this football game is in serious trouble. Not only in this division, but in the grand scheme of the NFC itself, because you can't go to 1-3 at this juncture of the season, losing to a divisional opponent and feel good about the prospects of your season. If you're either one of these teams, especially the 49ers, this would be your second loss within the division. None of them coming at home, mind you. Still, that would be your second loss within the division, and that would be 3 losses on the season already to start a season that's only 4 games in. So that's not a good ratio for either one of these teams. If you're the Rams, you had expectations coming into this season. I don't know how high they were. I know the floor for this season was a lot higher than the floor was a season ago. You go 7-8-1 the previous season, the next year you're thinking, hey, we can win 10 and we can get into the postseason. You drop to 1-3 in this football game. I don't know how realistic of a possibility that is. And so this team has to strap it up. And they got to get a win at home versus a struggling San Francisco 49ers team. And conversely, the 49ers, they got to play big boy football. They got to come in. They got to punch the Rams in the mouth like the Cowboys did last week, like the Atlanta Falcons did 2 weeks ago. Punch them right in the mouth early, set the tone with a football game, jump on these guys early, and make them feel like they're out of it. That's what the last 2 opponents did to the St. Louis Rams, and it was effective. That's what the 49ers need to do. I don't see that happening because it's family business. I expect this to be a tight matchup between 2 teams that know each other extremely well. But when it's all said and done, I can't go against the 49ers for another week. I can't expect them to lose 3 in a row. And look, they've got issues. Patrick Willis, questionable. Vernon Davis, questionable. Anthony Davis, questionable. We're talking about 3 of the better players on this football team likely not to play. It's a 50-50 chance. When you're questionable, that means you could play, you couldn't play. You don't know. You might play, you might not. And so we've seen what this offense looks like without Vernon Davis. And I don't want people to overlook how much of an impact Vernon Davis has on this offense. Kaepernick is already missing about 3 or 4 of his targets to begin with. You take away Vernon Davis, the last really dominant threat that he has outside of Anquan Bolden, and what do? When he got hurt against Seattle, the game changed offensively. He didn't play against Indianapolis. You saw how stagnant this offense was when they weren't running the football. He needs to play for this offense to be effective, and if he can't go, that's just another blow to the San Francisco 49ers team, who are already dealing with enough issues of their own. So this is going to be a lot of fun to watch. But at the end of the day, I've got the 49ers finding a way to get it done 20-16 on the road versus the St. Louis Rams. It's going to be a good game. I do not expect a blowout here. I expect 2 teams that know each other well to lock horns, and the team that does not make the mistakes, the team that does not commit the critical error at the critical juncture. Look, both of these teams might turn it over, but it's the team that takes care of the football in the 4th quarter and doesn't make that critical mistake that's probably going to win this football game. I expect the 49ers on the road to remain calm and win this football game. They made the critical mistake in St. Louis last year when they had the football game. Kaepernick pitches that read option pitch outside to a running back that wasn't there, pitched it too high, it's recovered for a touchdown, and they end up losing that football game. They made the critical mistake in the 4th quarter last year. I do not expect history to repeat itself in this football game. Give me the 49ers 20-16 in a nail biter. They need this one. They need it bad. They know they need it bad, and they are going to get it to go to 2-2 on the season. So that's my prediction for Thursday Night Football. Throw it up. It's a touchdown. I'm going to tack on this quick extra point. And look, Leslie Frazier has come out on numerous occasions and said, look, hey, I want Christian Ponder to be the guy in Minnesota. Of course you do. Of course you do. You guys are linked at the hip. You just got a contract extension, and you're feeling good about the prospects of you being the Minnesota Vikings head coach long term. But guess what? This is a what have you done for me lately league. And unfortunately, you're 0-3 right now. And the reason that you're 0-3, or at least one of the large reasons why you're 0-3, is because of quarterback Christian Ponder. And so the question is definitely going to be asked, does he belong as the starter in Minnesota? You've got one of the best, if not the best, back in the league in Adrian Peterson. And he can't flourish because teams are putting 8 and 9 men in the box. He's seeing 8-man fronts on a regular because they don't feel threatened by the fact that Christian Ponder can push the ball down the field. And so it's a disservice to Adrian Peterson. It's a disservice to this Minnesota Vikings offense. It's a disservice to this Minnesota Vikings football team that they don't have a quarterback that they can rely on week in and week out. So I'm not surprised when I hear Leslie Frazier say, hey, I want Christian Ponder to play. Of course you do. He needs to be successful for you to be successful and for you to keep your job. If he stinks it up and this team ends up bottoming out, you could still lose your job even though you just received a contract extension because you were in the draft room. You were one of the guys in control. You were one of the decision makers that decided to pull the trigger on Christian Ponder and make him a first-round pick when many, including myself, didn't have him as a first-rounder in that particular draft. And so all eyes are on Christian Ponder in Minnesota. And look, that light, that spotlight, it's getting bright and it's getting hot on Christian Ponder. And if you can't handle the heat in the kitchen, get your gloves, get your mitts, and get your chef hat and get the hell out of the kitchen. And right now, I'm about ready to take Christian Ponder and shoo him out of the kitchen because he isn't playing winning football right now in Minnesota. And it's starting to get late very early in Minnesota. They're 0-3, and they got the Steelers this week in London, who are also 0-3. If they can't win versus the winless Steelers, I think it's time for a change in Minnesota, especially if he has another one of these, 15 of 30 for 169 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interception type football games. If he puts up another one of those stinkers, it's time for this guy to go. And look, I'm not saying that Matt Castle is the answer because I don't think Matt Cassell, and that's what I like to call him because this guy to me is a joke as well. I don't think Matt Cassell is the answer, but if you're Leslie Frazier, you can't risk your job and put your neck on the line to save Christian Ponder and try to prove to people that he is a guy that can get it done. No need to try to validate a pick that you probably messed up on. Time for you to admit you made a mistake, move on, and if you got to insert Matt Castle, do so. But we all know Matt Cassell is not the answer in Minnesota either. So that's a dicey situation. And I know why Leslie Frazier is sticking by his guns. But at some point, you just got to move on. You got to let it go. You got to cut bait. At some point, you got to realize, dang, I made a mistake. I messed up. You got to admit it. You got to fess up. And you got to move on. Or else, Christian Ponder and all of his bad play will consume you. And you'll be fired too in Minnesota. So that's going to do it for me here on Thursday. Thank you for joining me. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the Lab Room. Come back on Friday when I give you my Pick'em Weekly for the week. Should be a lot of fun. See you then. Like the content? Want more? Sub up.
In the lab room.